Our story begins with a man whose assassination targets always die mysteriously within 3 days. He tried desperately to explain to the organization that none of this was actually his doing, but no one would believe him. Instead, they treated him like a secret weapon, dumping every impossible mission onto his desk. This absurd situation all started when he unexpectedly traveled back to an ancient dynasty. To be honest, it wasn't the heroic start he had hoped for. In this new world, he was a frail scholar who failed his exams every year. Orphaned and penniless, he found himself at a complete dead end. With no other choice, he took a risk and joined the assassination guild known as the Nether Pavilion, starting as a lowly rookie. A cold woman walked in, her presence commanding the room. The time had come for the final selection to begin. She was the Nether Pavilion's gold medal instructor, codenamed Qinghan. Behind her, subordinates carried a long table where a row of scrolls was neatly arranged. These were the bronze assassination orders, the first real test for any aspiring killer. Each scroll contained the name of a target. The rookie's task was simple: take a scroll and personally eliminate the mark. However, these targets were all top-tier experts with formidable defenses and a swarm of bodyguards surrounding them at all times. As soon as she spoke, every rookie present gasped in horror. This wasn't a test, it was a suicide mission. Even the strongest among them, a man named Scar, was only a third-rate martial artist. Attacking a top-tier expert was essentially choosing death. Qinghan's icy gaze swept across the room as she asked who would go first. The dungeon fell into a deathly silence. No one dared to move. Scar's forehead was drenched in cold sweat. He was fierce, but not stupid. Our protagonist, meanwhile, was so terrified his legs turned to jelly. He wanted nothing more than to stay far away from that table, but the more he panicked, the less his body seemed to obey him. His legs gave out, and he tumbled forward with a heavy thud, landing right in front of the long table. In his scramble to get up, his right hand happened to press down firmly on an open scroll. The room went silent as every eye locked onto him. Scar was stunned for a moment before breaking into a cruel smile. He thought the boy was a fool who had just signed his own death warrant. The boy was finished. He had accidentally accepted the mission to kill the iron-armed Bear King, a top-tier expert of long-standing fame. The Bear King's body was like iron, impervious to blades. How could this boy kill him? By biting him. The mockery began to spread. The mockery stung his ears, leaving his mind a complete blank as he stood there utterly dazed. He had only fallen because his legs were weak. It wasn't intentional. He hadn't meant to accept the mission. He wanted to explain, but looking into Qinghan's icy eyes, the words simply died in his throat. And then, something unexpected happened. To everyone's surprise, Qinghan didn't mock him. Instead, a flicker of admiration crossed her gaze. She was certain that while others cowered, he had stepped forward. In her eyes, he had faced a suicide mission without a moment's hesitation. Such courage and spirit, she told herself, were certainly not the traits of an ordinary man. She praised his bravery aloud, while internally, our protagonist was having a complete breakdown and was on the verge of tears. If he failed, he would surely die. But just then, a mechanical, electronic voice suddenly echoed inside his mind. The voice announced that it had detected the host was in a desperate, life-threatening situation, which met the specific activation requirements. The absolute good luck system was officially online, and his first beginner mission was being issued. The objective was to complete the bronze assassination order by killing the iron-armed Bear King, a top-tier martial arts expert. He was given a 72-hour time limit, with a beginner's gift pack promised as the reward for success. The penalty for failure was immediate erasure. Before he could even process this, 2 men in black grabbed him by the arms and dragged him out of the dungeon. As the cold night wind hit him, he shivered, finally regaining some semblance of clarity. He gripped his dagger tightly, staring at the name Iron-Armed Bear King on the scroll, feeling like he wanted to cry. This good luck system had appeared out of nowhere, but he saw no hope of survival. The 72-hour countdown had officially begun. If the Bear King didn't die within 3 days, he would be the one meeting his end. He was just a scholar who couldn't even hold a blade steady. Killing an invulnerable expert seemed impossible. He trudged forward in despair, clutching his weapon. It felt as though his life had already entered its final countdown. We find him next at the Moonrise Tavern in Qingha City, the busiest spot in town where all sorts of people gather. He sat in the most secluded corner of the first floor. He hadn't even finished his tea after half an hour. It wasn't that he wasn't thirsty, but rather, he didn't dare pick up the cup. His hands were shaking so violently that the tea kept splashing out. He had already been staking out this spot for 2 days. Based on his intel, the target was here in Qingha City. The Iron-Armed Bear King's real name was Sang Biao, a notorious local bully. Every day at noon, the man came here to eat. Our hero's so-called scouting was really just hiding in the corner and watching, but the more he watched, the worse he felt. The more he watched, the deeper his despair grew. Sang Biao was built like an iron tower, with arms thicker than our hero's thighs. He had personally seen a man get swatted away by a single slap, hitting a wall and dying instantly. It was a gruesome sight. There was simply no way for a scholar to assassinate such a monster. His blade couldn't pierce that skin, and his sword wouldn't leave a scratch. With the system's countdown showing less than 10 hours, he faced a grim reality. Act now, or be erased. Since death seemed inevitable either way, he gritted his teeth, wanting to rush forward and take the brute with him. However, the sheer terror made his limbs tremble even more violently. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves with a sip of tea, but his hands shook so hard the entire cup spilled onto the floor. As the liquid soaked into his pants, he cursed his own luck, resigning himself to wait for a servant to clean it up. But right then, an arrogant commotion erupted at the tavern entrance. A massive, tower-like figure squeezed through the door. It was none other than the iron-armed Bear King, Sang Biao. He seemed to be in high spirits today, his face flushed with joy as he led a pack of lackeys, loudly demanding the best wine and service. The lackeys shouted for everyone to clear the way for the Bear King. At that moment, our protagonist's heart jumped into his throat. Fear surged through his entire body, paralyzing him. With so many guards surrounding the target, he knew he'd be beaten to death before he even got close. Terrified, he curled his body inward, wishing he could simply crawl under the table and disappear. Meanwhile, in a private room on the second floor, Qinghan sat by the window, her eyes locked on everything below. She had been sent by the pavilion master to observe this mysterious newcomer on his suicide mission. But after 2 days of watching, she had seen nothing but a man drinking tea and shaking. Qinghan felt a wave of disappointment, suspecting he was just a reckless fool. A second later, however, her pupils contracted as she stared intently at the spilled tea on the floor. To be honest, her perspective was about to change completely. That specific patch of wet floor was directly in Sang Biao's daily path. He would have to walk right through it to reach his usual seat on the second floor. Qinghan was inwardly shaken, now convinced that he was a master of deception. Those 2 days of idling were actually spent mapping out the target's every habit. He wasn't using blades or swords. He had laid a lethal trap using nothing more than a cup of tea. Qinghan held her breath, watching the scene below with absolute focus. Downstairs, Sang Biao was cursing and shoving customers aside as he strode toward the stairs. He had just finished extorting a rival and was feeling quite invincible. In his arrogance, he failed to notice the wet floor. His foot slipped, his balance vanished, and his massive 200-pound frame pitched forward with heavy momentum. With a thunderous crash, his head slammed violently against the edge of a nearby dining table. And as we know, even a king can fall to a simple slip. A boiling pot of spicy red oil sat on that table, and as it flipped, the scalding liquid poured entirely over Sang Biao. He let out a blood-curdling scream. Even a top-tier master's iron skin technique couldn't block boiling oil. The searing pain in his eyes sent him rolling across the floor, but the fatal accidents were only just beginning. A nearby drunken guest was clutching a jar of strong spirits, which was knocked over in the chaos. The jar shattered, and the high-proof alcohol soaked Sang Biao from head to toe. As he thrashed in agony, he collided with a corner incense burner, sending sparks and hot ash flying everywhere. Those sparks landed on a body already drenched in oil and spirits. In an instant, a roaring fire erupted, turning the man into a human torch. Screaming in a blind panic, he bolted toward the window, desperate to jump and extinguish the flames. The entire tavern stood frozen in shock as the scene unfolded. The building fell into total chaos. Our hero watched, completely stunned, unable to believe his eyes as the burning figure crashed through the window. He plummeted from the second floor toward the street below, where a candied hawthorn vendor happened to be passing by with a stand full of sharp wooden skewers. The street fell into a deathly silence. A skewer had pierced his neck, and though the flames still flickered, all signs of life were already gone. Not even a god descending from the heavens could save him now. Inside and outside the tavern, everyone stared at this bizarre spectacle in breathless disbelief. Watching from the shadows, Qinghan gripped her sword hilt until her knuckles turned white. To her, this looked like the perfect alignment of time, place, and human action. This wasn't a common assassination. It was the power of the world itself being harnessed. It was invisible, formless, and utterly untraceable. There was no flash of a blade, no blood on his hands, and not a single ripple of internal energy. This, she realized, was the pinnacle of the assassin's art. She looked at our trembling hero and mistook his shivering for the quiet exhaustion that follows a massive expenditure of hidden power. She was truly shaken. She was convinced he was a terrifyingly elite master. Meanwhile, the real man was huddled in the corner, terrified that he had caused all this by spilling a cup of water. He eventually stumbled back to the Nether Pavilion stronghold, where everyone watched him as if he were a monster. The iron-armed Bear King was dead. The story of that bizarre death began to spread like wildfire. A top-tier master, supposedly invulnerable to blades, had been brought down by tea and a hot pot. Spirits, incense, and a random vendor had all played their part. It was an absurd sequence of events, yet the supposed mastermind was just a frail scholar. Suddenly, a roar shattered the silence. The scarred man, consumed by jealousy and refusing to accept the reality of the situation, stepped forward. He shouted that it was impossible, absolutely impossible, that such a weakling could have pulled off such a feat. He roared that a useless weakling with no internal energy couldn't possibly kill a top-tier master, insisting that he must have cheated. He was convinced there were hidden helpers or poison involved, unable to accept that the man he despised had achieved what he dared not even attempt. He shouted his refusal to accept it, invoking the pavilion's rule that any doubter could sign a life-and-death contract. He demanded a duel right then and there. Hearing the word duel, our poor hero felt his soul nearly leave his body. He waved his hands frantically in refusal, wanting nothing more than to surrender and escape this madman's provocation. An hour later, or so it felt, he stumbled backward as his legs turned to jelly. As he lost his balance, his toe accidentally struck a small pebble on the ground, sending it flying. The stone zipped through the air at a wicked angle, precisely striking a massive hornet's nest hanging under the eaves. Hundreds of venomous hornets swarmed out in a frenzy. The scarred man, still looking up and shouting, had no idea of the lethal crisis descending upon him. The angry swarm swept down like a dark cloud, engulfing him instantly. He felt a strange itching on his face and wondered what was happening. He instinctively lashed out, which only served to further enrage the hornets. Soon, his blood-curdling screams echoed throughout the courtyard. Wrapped in a living shroud of stinging insects, he had nowhere to run. His frantic arm-waving only invited more aggressive attacks. A third-rate martial artist's internal energy was no match for the relentless swarm. In just 17 seconds, the scarred man collapsed heavily to the ground. His body was swollen, foam bubbled at his mouth, and his skin was riddled with stingers. Just like that, his life was extinguished. The courtyard fell into a deathly silence once more. Everyone's gaze drifted between the corpse and our hero, who looked just as shocked as they were. To them, that simple backward step and the flick of a pebble were calculated moves to execute a challenger. It was, frankly, terrifying. The crowd gasped, their hearts filled with a new level of awe and dread. Then, the branch master, a man with a goatee, stepped out from the inner hall. Having witnessed the entire spectacle, his eyes were filled with absolute shock. Using food as a weapon and hornets as executioners was a method of killing without shedding a single drop of blood. It was the work of a true genius, or so he thought. He immediately announced an exceptional promotion to Gold-tier Assassin, a rank equal to a branch elder. The entire crowd erupted in a frenzy of whispers. A newcomer jumping straight to Gold tier was unprecedented in the Nether Pavilion's history, leaving our hero completely dazed. Our hero was utterly bewildered, knowing he had only clumsily kicked a pebble and couldn't understand why everyone was making such a fuss. The branch master then turned to Chin Han, declaring that from this day forward, she would no longer be tasked with training new recruits. Instead, she was ordered to stay by Chun Pingin's side as his personal maid, attending to his every daily need. Chin Han's heart sank, fearing she was being punished. However, the branch master's next words left her stunned. A gold-tier instructor becoming a newcomer's maid seemed like a humiliation at first glance. But in reality, it was a massive opportunity. She realized the master's deep intent. He wanted her to follow this god of death and learn his top-tier killing arts. Chin Han accepted the command, her voice trembling with a mix of hidden fear and excitement. Meanwhile, our hero was completely speechless. He was on the verge of a breakdown, wanting only to escape. Having this terrifying woman as his maid made his legs go weak with just one look. He felt he wouldn't survive a single day in her company. Just as he was about to refuse, the branch master handed him a silver scroll. The master explained that since Pingyan had just been promoted, and because no one else dared to take on this top-tier silver rank mission, it would be entrusted to him. The target was none other than the Minister of Personnel, a high-ranking official named Wang Chongyuan. As he gripped the scroll and looked at Chin Han, who had already slipped into her role as a dutiful maid, a sense of suffocation washed over him. He truly felt he couldn't endure this life. That evening, he moved into a high-class suite, with Chin Han following his every footstep. She was incredibly diligent, making the bed, folding clothes, and serving tea with the precision of a professional servant. To be honest, she was too good at it. Our hero sat there in total discomfort, feeling as though needles were pricking his back. He nervously told Chin Han that she didn't need to go to such trouble. He insisted he could do things himself, but she simply finished preparing his bath water and stood by to wait. It was a bit much, really. His face turned bright red, having never been served so intimately by a woman, especially one who happened to be a cold-blooded assassin. He slowly removed his outer robe, revealing a pale, thin frame with absolutely no muscle definition. He looked like a standard, frail scholar. He was, through and through, an ordinary person with no martial arts foundation. Seeing this, Chin Han's mind went completely blank as her worldview collapsed. How could an ordinary man with no internal energy slay a first-class master and wipe out a third-rate warrior? It defied every logic of the martial arts world. Then, a terrifying thought occurred to her that made her whole body tremble. Perhaps his realm was so high that he had transcended the physical entirely. She reasoned that a true master wouldn't need internal energy to move the heavens. Every gesture would naturally harness the power of the world itself. This realm is known as returning to simplicity. She finally realized that Chen Pingyan didn't lack energy. He had simply transcended it entirely. A cup of tea, a simple pebble, everything he touched became a conduit for the Tao. Suddenly, every confusing detail finally made sense to her. Chin Han gazed at his back with fanatical worship. Previously, she felt being a maid was beneath her, but now she saw it as a divine opportunity. To follow a supreme master who had returned to his roots was a rare blessing. Even serving him tea was an honor beyond words. Chin Han was now completely devoted, bowing her head with a newfound, watery tenderness. This sudden change in her behavior made our hero shudder. He was utterly bewildered, having no idea what kind of ridiculous conclusions this woman had jumped to. The next morning, he woke from a nightmare. Drenched in cold sweat, he remembered his dream. He had tried to assassinate the minister, only to be pinned down by a group of massive guards. In the dream, the minister himself had ordered his execution. He sat up gasping for air, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. As he opened his eyes, he saw a cold, beautiful face barely 3 inches from his own. He let out a startled yelp of pure terror. He practically bounced off the bed in fright, pointing a trembling finger at Chin Han and stammering, asking what on earth she was doing. Chin Han calmly withdrew her gaze, holding a copper basin filled with steaming hot water for his morning routine. She told him it was time to wash up. Her voice remained flat and emotionless, yet her eyes held a strange, flickering intensity. She watched him closely as he scrambled to prepare for the day, her mind already racing with new theories about his every move. He splashed water on his face in a frantic rush. Chin Han observed his clumsy movements, convinced that his temperament was truly extraordinary. To her, the fact that he could kill 2 people one night and show absolutely no temper the next morning was proof of his greatness. She couldn't sense even a hint of killing intent from him. Such perfect control over one's own aura was, in her mind, completely unheard of. Even his scream of terror seemed like a calculated move to her. She assumed it wasn't fear at all, but something far more tactical. She believed it was a unique breathing technique, using a sudden shock to stimulate the body's hidden potential and sharpen the senses. She marveled at such a profound cultivation method. If our hero knew what she was thinking, he would likely have fainted on the spot. He would likely have dropped to his knees right then and there, begging her to stop, as he was simply terrified by her presence. Meanwhile, Chin Han began tidying the bed. As she worked, she asked with feigned casualness about his plan for the upcoming mission. She wanted to know his strategy regarding the Minister of Personnel, Wang Zhongyuan, hoping to glean even a shred of his lethal wisdom from a few words. Deep down, Chen Pingyan was complaining bitterly, but he didn't dare say a word. He had finally realized how things worked in this place. With this group of assassins, the more you explain, the more wildly they use their imaginations. The best approach, naturally, was to act profound and stay silent. And so, imitating the masters he had seen on television, he walked to the window, hands behind his back, and gazed at the sky at a 45-degree angle. Then, he let out a soft, long sigh. It was a sigh of genuine, heartfelt despair, the sound of a man who truly had no way out. To Chin Han's ears, however, this sigh sounded like a divine melody from the highest heavens, carrying infinite and profound meaning. Her heart shook. There was a legend within the Netherworld Pavilion that when a master assassin sees the inevitable end of a target, they let out a single sigh. It is a sigh for a life that is already gone, a somber prelude to a death sentence that has already been signed. She was convinced he had already seen the minister's death, even though he had only just received the mission details a moment ago. Her voice trembled slightly as she addressed him. She pointed out that Wang Zhongyuan was a high-ranking official of the first rank. His residence was heavily guarded, and it was rumored that the estate was protected by 2 elite martial arts masters at the peak of the second rank. Ordinary assassins couldn't even touch the outer walls. She was trying to warn him that the target would be incredibly difficult to handle. Hearing this, Chen Pingyan felt his heart sink even further. It wasn't just heavy security. There were 2 peak-level experts involved. He wondered how he was supposed to survive this. In his growing anxiety, he instinctively raised his hand to rub his brow. It was a habit from his previous life, something he did whenever a research paper gave him a massive headache. But of course, the meaning changed again. In Chin Han's eyes, this perfectly ordinary gesture took on a much darker tone. To her, it meant that Wang Zhongyuan was already a dead man. She looked at his lonely silhouette by the window, and the worship in her eyes was now practically overflowing. Chin Han took a deep breath and bowed respectfully to his back, telling him there was no need for him to trouble himself further. She insisted that infiltrating and scouting was a crude task best left to her, while he should simply sit back and relax. She told him to wait for the right moment to strike. Before he could even react, she vanished in a flash of movement. Like a ghost, she was gone. Left alone, Chen Pingyan felt like crying, realizing his logic and theirs were on completely different frequencies. He waited restlessly in the room for a long time, but Chin Han didn't return. Eventually, his stomach began to growl quite insistently. Forcing himself to leave the room in search of food, he stepped out only to find the courtyard packed with the branch's assassins. Every single one of them watched him with eyes full of awe. As he appeared, they all bowed their heads in perfect unison. They greeted him as Your Excellency with such intensity that he nearly stumbled, his legs turning to jelly from the sheer shock. He gave a small, awkward wave. Immediately, a clever assassin rushed over, bowing and scraping with a wide, eager smile. The man asked if Lord Pingyan was ready to dine, proudly announcing that a meal had already been prepared for him. Others chimed in, begging for any command and swearing they would face 10,000 deaths to serve him. Yes, quite dramatic indeed. They claimed it was an honor to serve him, the very same group that had looked at him with utter contempt just yesterday. Now, they were acting like devoted puppies. Feeling completely out of place, he ate a few bites and retreated back to his room. It was clear now that his reputation in this strange place was firmly established as an unfathomable, godlike killing machine. Nothing he said would change their minds now. He was committed to this path. In his desperation, he called out to the system. He asked if it was there, and a voice echoed in his mind, confirming the system was ready to assist its host. He needed to confirm if the mission only worked if he was within a certain distance of the target. The system confirmed this. To trigger the law of causality, he had to be within a 5-mile radius of the target for the mission to take effect. He asked if staying behind would mean the mission was a failure. The system's response was cold and very direct. Failure meant the host would be erased. That small spark of hope he had for staying safe was instantly extinguished. It meant he had no choice but to go. The system confirmed it, leaving him to slump back into his chair in defeat. He felt utterly hopeless. Calling this the absolute good luck system seemed like a cruel joke. Absolute death sentence system was far more accurate. As he sat there sighing, the window creaked open and Chin Han returned, carrying the faint, metallic scent of blood that quickly faded away. She reported that her scouting was complete, confirming that Wang Chongyuan's estate was indeed as fortified as an iron fortress. She had infiltrated the outer courtyard and dealt with 3 sentries just to gather a bit of intelligence. Our protagonist, however, was horrified. He couldn't believe she had already started killing people. According to her, Wang Chongyuan was extremely cautious and as timid as a mouse. Everything the man ate or wore passed through a dozen inspections, and 3 famous doctors were kept on standby for the slightest discomfort. He never attended outside banquets and rarely left his home, spending his days strictly within the confines of his own private back garden. Chin Han finished her report and looked up, waiting for his divine instructions. To her, these details were merely chess pieces for his grand plan. Deep down, Chun Ping'an felt even more despair. Their target was essentially a shut-in suffering from a severe case of paranoid delusions. A man like that wouldn't even step outside, let alone have an accident. How on earth was he supposed to make his death look accidental? After a long, tense silence, he managed to choke out 4 simple words. I see. Very well. To be honest, it was all he could say. Chin Han's eyes lit up instantly as she asked when they would depart. He glanced at the system's countdown timer on the floating panel. With less than 40 hours remaining, any further delay meant his own death. He had no choice but to brace himself and move forward. He told her they would leave tomorrow. Chin Han's eyes burned with a fierce fighting spirit. She was clearly eager for the coming mission. She couldn't wait to witness the shocking methods her master would use to eliminate a high-ranking official hiding inside such a thick shell. The next morning, before the sun had even risen, Chin Han dragged him out of bed, announcing it was time for them to head out. He looked half asleep and entirely miserable. He truly didn't want to go. After all, the residence of the Minister of Personnel was no ordinary house. It was one of the central hubs of power in the capital, with security that was likely not much weaker than the imperial palace itself. He worried that if a weakling like him were caught and treated as an assassin, his life would end in a very tragic misunderstanding. He looked at her tentatively and asked if they really, truly had to go, which, as we know, was a question with only one answer. He tried to reason with her, pointing out that if Wang Chongyuan refused to leave his estate, their going there would be utterly useless. Chin Han took a deep breath, wondering if he was testing her, and insisted that he must have already seen through the situation. She explained that the art of assassination is divided into 3 levels, the lowest being a reckless, frontal assault by mere brutes. The middle path involved poison or arson, but the path her master chose was something far more sophisticated. To her, his was the supreme strategy, manipulating the world's natural cause and effect to set a grand stage for his target's demise. This method didn't require him to risk his life in danger. He only needed to align with the right time and place to control the outcome. Chun Ping'an listened, completely stunned. To be honest, this woman was a better storyteller than he could ever hope to be. This talk of right time and place sounded exactly like the system's requirements. He wondered for a moment how she could possibly know that. He looked into Chin Han's eyes, which were shimmering with a fanatical light, and realized she had once again filled in the blanks herself. She concluded they didn't need to infiltrate the mansion at all, but simply wait nearby for the perfect moment to strike. Their only task was to find the ideal location. She was convinced he had used some incomprehensible logic to determine that today was the day. She believed his calculations had already proven that the heavenly timing would align perfectly within the next few hours. Chun Ping'an stared at her, his mouth hanging open, unable to utter a single word in response to her wild assumptions. After all, he couldn't exactly tell her he was only leaving today because his death timer was about to run out. So he simply cleared his throat, put his hands behind his back, and resumed his grandmaster persona, praising her for understanding so clearly. Chin Han bowed deeply, promising she would do her absolute best and would not fail to live up to his expectations. And so, the 2 of them set off. The local branch of the Ming sect had even prepared an inconspicuous carriage for their journey. As he sat inside, he felt less like a master strategist and more like a prisoner being hauled off to his own execution. Opposite him, Chin Han sat with a solemn expression and closed eyes, looking as though she were communing with the forces of the universe. In reality, she was frantically replaying his previous moves, the cup of tea and the pebble, trying to decode his infinite wisdom. To her, even the most ordinary objects could become lethal weapons in his hands. This time, however, Their target was Wang Chongyuan, a tiger hiding securely within his shell. She wondered what commonplace item he would use to set the stage. Her palms were sweating from the sheer anticipation. A little later, the carriage came to a halt 2 streets away from the minister's estate. Qin Han informed him they couldn't get any closer. We see Qin Pingyun pulled back the curtain to take a look, spotting a magnificent 7-row mansion in the distance. 2 rows of soldiers in bright armor stood at the gates, while archers patrolled the high walls with constant vigilance. With such defenses, not even a fly could get inside. He suggested they simply find a place nearby to wait it out. He asked this in a low voice, hoping to find a tea house or an inn to hide in, so long as it was within the required 10-mile radius. However, Qin Han shook her head. She jumped down from the carriage, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings before asking him to follow. She led him into a narrow alleyway. Not knowing what else to do, he simply braced himself and followed her lead. She pointed toward the roof of a tall tavern and declared they had arrived. He wondered, quite naturally, what they were doing up there. She explained it was the highest point in the area, offering the best vantage point to see the entire back garden of the estate. Wang Chongyuan spent every afternoon in that garden. By standing here, they could keep the target in their sights at all times. They would be able to observe his every move and pinpoint exactly where he lived. To be honest, this was far more work than he wanted. His scalp tingled with anxiety. He had hoped they would just find a quiet corner to hide away until the timer ran out. He pointed at the smooth, vertical walls of the tavern, which were at least 10 meters high, and asked how they were supposed to get up. Since he didn't know the first thing about martial arts, he felt stuck. Qin Han didn't say a word, but simply stepped in front of him and crouched down. She patted her firm, strong shoulders, making her intentions perfectly clear. She was going to carry him up. His face turned bright red. The idea of a grown man being carried by a girl seemed ridiculous to him, and he stammered that it wouldn't be proper. But Qin Han's voice was firm, reminding him that the perfect timing wouldn't wait. Left with no choice, he slowly climbed onto her back. The girl's body felt soft, carrying a faint, delicate fragrance that stirred a strange sensation in his heart. But he didn't have much time to dwell on it. Suddenly, he felt his body become weightless. With him on her back, Qin Han lightly tapped her foot against the wall, moving like a single leaf. She drifted effortlessly onto the roof of the 3rd floor, a process as fast as lightning and as steady as a mountain. It was quite the feat, really. He lay flat on the roof and stole a glance downward, his legs turning to jelly from the height. Qin Han, however, had already entered a state of focus. She pulled a small telescope from her robes and handed it to him, addressing him as young master. He took the device, though his hands were shaking. Imitating her, he lay behind the roof ridge and peered toward the minister's estate. To be honest, he felt more like a spy than a hero. Through the lens, the back garden of the mansion was crystal clear. We see elegant pavilions, rockeries, and flowing water arranged with exquisite taste. Qin Han whispered beside him, asking what he saw. Her voice was filled with a quiet, intense expectation. She wanted to know what hidden dangers his divine eyes could detect in this seemingly peaceful garden. He, however, saw something much simpler. All he could see was a plump old man in expensive official robes, surrounded by a crowd of maids and servants. The man was flying a kite. Yes, in the middle of all this tension, he was simply flying a kite. He figured that old man must be Wang Chongyuan and answered honestly. Upon hearing this, Qin Han's gaze sharpened instantly. Flying a kite, she remarked that Wang Chongyuan was indeed cautious. While it looked like simple entertainment, it was a calculated move. By staying in the open garden, he remained far from any rockeries or buildings where an assassin might hide. Furthermore, he was surrounded. The servants formed a human wall around him. In such a situation, any ground-based attack would be impossible to execute successfully. He scanned the entire garden, but couldn't find a single hint of killing intent. It was a beautiful day, with singing birds and fragrant flowers. Aside from the fat old man being a bit of an eyesore, everything was harmonious. He struggled for words, finally noting that the wind was quite strong. It was a bit of a pointless remark, as the wind was indeed rattling the roof tiles. Yet, that simple observation struck Qin Han like a bolt of lightning. The wind. She repeated the word as if a veil had been lifted. Of course, the wind was the key. She realized Wang Chongyuan believed he was safe in the open, but he had completely overlooked the most critical factor of all. The key variable, the great force of heaven and earth, the wind, was an invisible power from the heavens. He had already, it seemed, grasped this. He saw the entire board, never once getting bogged down in the shallow, mundane layouts of common men. From the very beginning, his perspective was fixed on the grand pattern of the world. He intended to borrow the great winds to execute a technique of unpredictable change. Qin Han finally understood that he wanted to use the wind's power. Suddenly, both of them heard a commotion rising from below. "Stop right there. Stop. Who goes there? Quick, there are suspicious people over there. Catch them." Heart racing, he lay flat on the roof and peered down. Below the tavern, several sneaky-looking figures had appeared out of nowhere. They were being chased by a squad of forest guards. A terrible thought struck him. What if he and Qin Han were mistaken for accomplices? Terrified, he tried to pull his head back, but his foot slipped. The roof tiles, neglected for years, were already quite loose. In his nervous panic, he applied too much pressure and a tile shattered beneath him. With a loud crash, his entire body lost balance, and began sliding off the roof. A sharp, desperate cry pierced the air as he tumbled toward the edge. "Young master!" Chin Han cried out in alarm. Without a second thought, she leaped after him, her hand outstretched to catch him in midair. But he was falling far too fast. She only managed to snag the corner of his robe. The sound of fabric tearing echoed through the alley. Chin Han was left holding nothing but a scrap of cloth. It truly looked like the end. He fell like a lead weight, straight down, toward the narrow alleyway below. He closed his eyes, his heart filled with absolute despair. He never imagined that after avoiding assassins and surviving missions, he would meet his end by simply tripping off a roof. It was, to be honest, a rather pathetic way to go. There was a dull thud, but the expected pain of impact never came. Instead, he felt something soft and slightly bouncy beneath him. Cautiously opening one eye, he realized he was pinned on top of someone. The stranger was dressed in black night gear and wore a mask. The man's eyes were rolling back, and he was foaming at the mouth, clearly having the wind knocked out of him. He was alive, much to his own shock. He scrambled off the man as quickly as possible. Looking around, he saw several other similarly dressed figures lying scattered in the alley. Nearby, a squad of forest guards stood in complete bewilderment, staring at him and the human cushion he had just landed on. The guard looked at the young man who had fallen from the sky completely unharmed, his mouth hanging open wide enough to fit an egg. He praised the young man's skill, explaining that they were under orders to pursue these thieves, who were quite cunning and had vanished into the alley. No one could have predicted that a divine soldier would suddenly drop from the heavens like this. It was, to be honest, quite a sight. The captain struggled for a moment before concluding that the young man had used his very body to knock the thief leader unconscious. It was as if justice itself had descended from above. Li Zikong stood there dazed, looking at the poor soul on the ground and checking his own limbs. He realized that aside from some torn clothes, he hadn't even scratched his skin. He tried to explain that he had simply slipped. The captain's expression clearly said he didn't believe a word of it. He told the hero there was no need for such modesty. To slip from a 3-story roof and still manage to accurately crush a thief leader was a feat they all deeply admired. Just then, Chin Han landed silently in the alley. She glanced at the fallen thieves and then at the perfectly safe Zikong. A flicker of realization crossed her cold eyes. To her, everything finally made sense. Or so she told herself. Waves of shock hit her again. She was certain Li Zikong wasn't clumsy at all. He had intentionally exposed himself to lure the guards. He must have known the thieves were hiding here. As for the fall, she saw it as a stroke of absolute genius. It was a way to subdue the thief leader while perfectly masking his true strength, making everyone believe it was just a mere coincidence. It was a masterstroke. Chin Han's admiration for him had now reached a height that was, frankly, unprecedented. If Zikong knew what she was thinking, he would have surely protested. He really had just slipped, but who would believe him now? The guards, having captured the criminals, decided not to disturb the duo further and quickly hauled the half-dead thieves away. One looked fragile, yet fell from the sky like a god. The other was ghostly and cold. Neither seemed like an ordinary person. The guards figured it was best not to provoke them. Once they left, only Zikong and Chin Han remained in the quiet alley. "The path is clear, young master. Now we simply wait for the right moment," Chin Han said with deep respect. Zikong patted his chest, his legs still shaking from the fright. At this point, he only wanted to leave this chaotic place as fast as possible. "Perhaps we should find another place. It's far too dangerous here," Zikong suggested, and Chin Han immediately agreed. Chin Han nodded, convinced that since this location's strategic value was spent, it was time to move. In her eyes, every step he took was deeply calculated. She believed the rooftop's only purpose was to lure out the thieves, and now that the goal was met, they had to leave. And so, Chin Han led him to a tea house directly opposite the minister's manor. This time, they didn't climb onto the roof, but instead found a seat by the window on the second floor. From here, while the garden was hidden, they had a clear view of the sky above the manor. Zikong held his teacup with hands that were still trembling. That fall had truly terrified him. "System," he whispered internally. "I nearly died just now. Can't your good luck system protect me a little better?" The system's response was, as always, quite clinical. It explained that his luck primarily influenced causality, mission objectives, and his romantic fortune. As for his personal safety, it only provided basic protection against minor mishaps, like preventing him from tripping on flat ground or choking while drinking water. The recent incident, however, was a case of the host actively putting himself in a dangerous situation which exceeded the basic protection range. Yet, due to the passive influence of absolute luck, danger had been turned into safety. Zikong understood perfectly. If he went looking for trouble, even the system couldn't save him. But because he was lucky, he would always find some poor soul to act as his cushion. He let out another long, weary sigh. Beside him, Chin Han's body tensed the moment she heard that sound. To her, it was the sigh of the Yama once again. She immediately looked up, her gaze fixed intensely on the sky outside. If the young master was sighing, the fated moment was near. Meanwhile, in the back garden of the minister's manor, Wang Chongyuan was having the time of his life, completely unaware of our duo. "Higher, go higher," he shouted, pulling the kite's string with excitement, sweat pouring down his face as he played. The wind was strong today, and his massive spreading eagle kite was flying so high it was almost invisible. "Master," his servant called out, "the wind is too strong. Shouldn't we bring it in?" But Chong Yuan simply scoffed at the suggestion. He boasted that the string was made of celestial silk mixed with diamond thread, bought at a high price from a Western merchant. He claimed the line could hold a cow without snapping, let alone a bit of wind. He had absolute confidence in his precious kite string. But just as he was reveling in his pride, the wind in the sky seemed to grow even stronger. A sudden, mysterious gale blew through, and the massive eagle kite began to sway violently in the air, looking very much like a drunken man. "Master, let go," the butler cried out. The force was simply too great, pulling Wang Chongyuan forward several steps. Chongyuan panicked and tried to release it, but that incredibly tough kite string was the problem. Because it was pulled so tight, it had wound itself firmly around his wrist and wouldn't shake off. He screamed in terror as several guards rushed forward to help him. At that exact moment, a bolt of lightning descended from the heavens. It struck with perfect, terrifying precision, hitting that unfortunate kite high up in the sky. The kite ignited instantly, turning into a ball of fire. But the real horror was the electrical current. It traveled down that metal-infused silk string at the speed of light. A blinding flash of electricity instantly enveloped Wang Chongyuan and the guards who were clutching the line. They didn't even have time to scream. Before a sound could escape, they were charred black, falling stiffly to the ground as smoke rose from their bodies. The smell of burnt meat began to drift through the garden. Back at the tea house, we see that Zikong and Qin Han witnessed the strike. Zikong simply wondered why there was thunder on such a clear day, but for Qin Han, the sight of the lightning left her completely frozen. Only two words echoed in her mind: summoning lightning. She turned her head sharply, looking at the man beside her, who was still worrying about his trembling hands, as if he were a god. To summon divine thunder. To borrow the winds of heaven and earth, using a kite as a guide and a thread as a conduit to strike a high-ranking official inside a heavily guarded manor. Was this truly something a mortal could achieve? To her, it seemed impossible. It was a divine miracle. Qin Han felt her entire worldview being crushed into dust in that single moment, only to be rebuilt in an even more incredible way. She stared at Zikong, her lips trembling, unable to utter a single word. We returned to Zikong, who finally finished his cup of tea. He set the cup down and looked out the window at the charred remains of what was once a man and that snapped kite string. His mind was a complete mess. He couldn't believe this actually worked. Deep down, he tried to convince himself that Wang Chongyuan being struck by lightning had absolutely nothing to do with him. After all, he had simply been sitting there enjoying a drink. But the official reports would tell a different story. Wang Chongyuan was dead. This news seemed to grow wings, spreading across the entire capital in less than an hour. The imperial court was shaken to its core. Panic began to take hold. Some whispered that it was divine retribution for his many crimes, while others suspected dark sorcery from his rivals. There were even those who swore they saw a dragon coiling in the clouds, descending to deliver justice with a heavenly bolt. The theories were endless, but strangely enough, not a single person connected this event to an assassination attempt. And who could blame them? The idea of an assassin controlling lightning was, to be honest, completely absurd. When Zikong and Qin Han returned to the secret stronghold of the Nether Pavilion, they were met with an even more theatrical scene than before. The branch master, that elderly man with the goatee, was personally leading every gold-ranked assassin to greet them at the entrance. As soon as Zikong stepped off the carriage, everyone, including the branch master, dropped to one knee in perfect unison. They welcomed Lord Ping'an back from his triumphant mission, their voices filled with a terrifyingly sincere level of fanaticism. Zikong felt his legs go weak and nearly fell to his knees himself, but luckily, Qin Han was quick enough to steady him. At this point, he was simply numb to the absurdity. He gave a stiff nod and allowed the crowd to escort him inside. The branch master praised him as a god among men, claiming that using heavenly thunder to execute a traitor was a feat beyond imagination. He admitted he was utterly humbled by such methods. It seems the pavilion master had already sent down a new decree. Because of this legendary achievement, Zikong was being promoted to the rank of Heaven-class Secret Agent No. 1. His status was now equal to the pavilion elders, accompanied by 10,000 gold pieces, 10 beauties, and a luxury mansion. But that wasn't all. The pavilion master also had a very specific message regarding his next steps. The decree stated that since Qin Han had served him so well, he would now belong to Zikong permanently. The gold, the beauties, and the mansion didn't even register. Zikong only heard that final sentence about the assassin. He stole a glance at Qin Han, whose head was bowed low, making it impossible to read his expression. However, the slight reddening of Qin Han's ears betrayed a heart that was anything but calm. Deep down, Qin Han felt that being able to follow his master forever and witness such divine methods of assassination was the greatest honor of his entire life. Zikong, meanwhile, realized he could never shake off this living iceberg. He wondered how he would ever manage to escape now. Back in his room, he slumped into a chair, feeling utterly exhausted. He felt like a roast duck trapped over a fire, unable to get down. Qin Han poured him hot tea and spoke softly. He asked what his master was thinking. After the lightning incident, his attitude had shifted significantly. Simple awe had evolved into a form of fanatical faith. In his eyes, Zikong was no longer a mere mortal. Zikong watched the tea leaves floating in his cup and sighed, wondering when all of this would finally end. He was truly weary of living every day in fear while being worshipped like some sort of deity. All he wanted was to be an ordinary, lazy nobody, which, given his current rank, was a bit optimistic. To Qin Han, however, the question of when it would end sounded less like a lament and more like a signal. He suspected his master was playing a much larger game, and a bold theory began to form in his mind. Zikong had eliminated both the iron-walled Bear King and the Minister of Rights, one a hero, the other a high official. They seemed unrelated, but both targets shared a hidden connection that pointed directly toward one powerful figure. The Crown Prince. The Bear King had been the prince's primary influence within the martial world, and Wang Chongyuan was a core member of the prince's political faction. By removing the prince's left and right arms, Qin Han wondered if the ultimate target was the throne itself. He took a sharp breath, staring at his master in shock. His eyes were filled with pure terror. He realized Zikong wasn't just completing missions, he was single-handedly shaking the very foundations of the nation. He intended to overthrow the entire dynasty. That was why he asked when it would end, because his ultimate goal was the throne itself, the seat of supreme power. Until that goal was reached, this path would never truly have an end. Having connected the dots, Qin Han looked at Zikong's handsome yet weary face, feeling nothing but endless, profound awe. Suddenly, Qin Han dropped to one knee, his gaze firm as he spoke. He told his master not to worry. No matter how dangerous the road ahead might be, he promised to follow forever, helping Zikong complete his great ambition. Zikong was baffled. What great ambition? His only real wish was to finally get a decent night's sleep. He wondered what strange things Qin Han was imagining now. But before he could speak, a knock sounded at the door. A voice summoned Lord Pingyun, stating the pavilion master requested his presence. Zikong wondered which master they meant. Qin Han answered for him, explaining it was the Grand Pavilion Master. He had been traveling and, hearing of Zikong's deeds, wanted a meeting. Zikong's heart sank. Even the ultimate boss had been stirred. Escorted by Qin Han, he felt his luck had finally run out. With great trepidation, we follow him into a quiet room. There, an elderly man in gray robes sat, looking like a simple farmer. He appeared utterly ordinary, yet the moment Zikong entered, he felt an invisible pressure, so heavy he could barely breathe. This was the Grand Pavilion Master of the Nether Pavilion, an unfathomable old monster, to be perfectly honest. The old man opened his eyes, which were cloudy yet deep, as if he were addressing Chun Pingyun directly. Those eyes seemed to peer into his very soul. Zikong forced himself to bow, identifying himself as the junior, Chun Pingyun. The master said nothing, simply watching him. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the room became increasingly suffocating. Zikong's back was soaked with sweat. He was certain this senior had seen right through him and realized he was a total fraud. Just as he felt he could no longer endure the silence, the pavilion master finally spoke, simply saying, "Not bad." His voice was hoarse and deep. He remarked that Zikong had returned to a state of true simplicity, the highest level of the great Tao. The master praised him, but Zikong was lost. True simplicity again? He wondered if the Nether Pavilion had some mandatory training for over-imagining things. The old man admitted that despite a lifetime of cultivation and reaching the Grandmaster realm, he still couldn't see through Zikong. He sensed no aura at all. Yet, Zikong performed deeds that defied gods and ghosts alike. The master confessed that this level of attainment was something even he couldn't match. Deep down, Zikong was practically begging them to stop filling in the blanks. The master declared that having such a genius was a blessing for the pavilion. The Grandmaster stood up, walked over, and patted Zikong's shoulder. He announced that from this day forward, Zikong's status would be equal to his own. Every resource in the Nether Pavilion was now at his disposal. However, the old man had one request. Zikong felt his heart tighten as he asked him to speak. The master asked him to kill one person. As he spoke, a flicker of deep-seated, bone-chilling hatred flashed through the old man's cloudy eyes. This target was the master's own senior brother, the current leader of the martial world, the sword saint known as Lung Qianshan. The Martial Arts Alliance leader, Sword Saint Lung Qianshan. When those words left the Grand Master's mouth, the weight of the name filled the room. Even Qin Han couldn't help but gasp. We are talking about the man who stands at the very peak of the martial arts world's pyramid. 30 years ago, Lung Qianshan became famous by challenging the leaders of the 7 great sects with his flying, immortal, sword technique and winning. He was hailed as a once-in-a-century genius of the sword. 20 years ago, atop Manhwa, he achieved something even more legendary. With a single strike, he defeated the demon cult leader, solidifying his position as the undisputed head of the entire martial alliance. 10 years ago, he entered secluded meditation. Rumor has it he has already surpassed the Grandmaster realm, reaching the threshold of a land immortal. To kill him would be like trying to shatter the heavens themselves. Qin Han instinctively started to say it was impossible, but he caught himself. He swallowed his words and looked at Zikong. He realized that while it was impossible for others, for his master, nothing was truly out of reach. If the man could summon heavenly lightning at will, what did a mere martial alliance leader matter in the grand scheme of things? Naturally, Zikong's face remained perfectly calm upon hearing the mission. He simply stood there in silence, looking quite profound. In reality, his brain had completely short-circuited. Sword Saint, Alliance Leader, Land Immortal? To be honest, he was panicking internally. He wondered if the game's difficulty was ramping up a bit too fast. The first two stages were just small bosses, but this was something else entirely. He felt as if the game had skipped straight from the first level to the final boss. How was he supposed to play this? He desperately asked the system if he could refuse. Deep down, he was screaming for help. The system calmly replied that this was an S-rank request from the Grandmaster, not a mandatory system mission. While he could choose to refuse, which brought him a momentary spark of joy, the system warned him that doing so would put his God of Killers persona at risk. His reputation would crumble, and the Grandmaster's trust in him would plummet instantly. To be honest, it wasn't much of a choice at all. His expression darkened. If he dared to say no, he was certain this old monster would turn on him and perhaps even slice him up for research. The Grandmaster's voice rang out again, sounding weary as he admitted he knew just how difficult this task truly was. He claimed that Lung Qianshan was no longer human, possessing a sword so fast it could supposedly even sever the threads of causality itself. Severing causality? Zikong's heart skipped a beat. The master explained he had already sent 3 top-tier heaven-rank assassins to do the deed. All of them were killed instantly the moment they moved to strike, while Lung Qianshan never even had to leave his room. Yes, it was that effortless. Anyone harboring even a shred of killing intent who entered his range would be immediately detected by his overwhelming sword intent. They would then be struck down by an invisible blade. It was a defense that seemed utterly impenetrable to any normal martial artist. The master fell silent, watching Zikong and waiting for an answer. In his mind, Lung Qianshan's domain was a weapon of cause and effect. He believed Zikong's heavenly demon-slaying technique was a higher-level version of that same power. A battle of destiny against destiny, so to speak. Using one law of causality to counter another was the only way he could imagine defeating the Sword Saint. Zikong, however, was feeling completely numb. The idea of an automatic, long-range locking system that kills instantly sounded even more broken than his own game system, which is saying quite a lot. At least his system required him to be within range. Accepting this felt like a death sentence, so he instinctively used his passive skill once more. He let out a sigh of despair and rubbed his temples, feeling a massive headache coming on. To the Grandmaster and Qin Han, however, this looked very different. They saw the sigh and the rubbing of the brow and exchanged a look of pure excitement. To them, these were the signs of a master at work. They were convinced he was currently calculating a way to shatter Lung Qianshan's domain. Imagine their surprise if they knew he was just panicking. To buy himself some time, Zikong put on his most profound face and began to mutter solemnly about the nature of severing causality. Those simple words sent a shockwave through the Grandmaster's heart. To think that Zikong would face a sword saint capable of severing causality and describe the situation as merely interesting. We can only imagine the level of confidence the master assumed he possessed. It was truly impressive. The Grandmaster clapped his hands in excitement, convinced that Zikong already had a plan. He promised that whatever resources were needed to complete the mission, the Nether Pavilion would provide them without question. His only wish was to see Lung Qianshan's head before his own life finally reached its end. After giving Zikong a long, meaningful look, the old man turned and left the room. It seemed he was off to mobilize the entire pavilion's strength. Now, only Zikong and Qin Han remained in the quiet chamber. Qin Han's voice carried a slight tremble as he asked if there truly was a way to defeat the Sword Saint. Deep down, Zikong knew he didn't have a single clue. In fact, the only way he could think of at that moment was finding a way to run away. But of course, he couldn't say that. Instead, he maintained his mysterious facade, claiming he had his own methods while continuing to play the part of the master. Qin Han's admiration only grew deeper upon hearing this. Just then, a loud commotion erupted outside, and a voice demanded that Chen Pinggan show himself. The voice was arrogant and aggressive, catching Zikong off guard. He wondered who could possibly be brave enough to shout his name like that in pavilion territory. As we see Zikong and Qin Han step outside, they find a young man standing in the courtyard, gripping a long spear with a defiant expression. The man was flanked by several other powerful assassins. Qin Han frowned immediately, recognizing the intruder as Yu Qingtian. Yu Qingtian was another heaven-rank assassin within the Nether Pavilion, famous for his domineering spear techniques and his utter lack of humility. He was considered one of the top talents of the younger generation, second only to Qin Han himself, and he clearly wasn't here for a friendly chat. With a cold sneer, Yu Qingtian pointed his spear toward Zikong. He explained that he had heard rumors of a new god of killers joining their ranks. He was bitter that this newcomer had been promoted 3 ranks at once, surpassing the veterans. He wanted to see if this man actually lived up to the hype. Yu Qingtian's gaze landed on Zikong, filled with nothing but disdain. To him, the man standing there looked like a complete weakling with no internal energy at all. He mocked the idea of calling such a person a god of killers and was even more offended that Qin Han had been assigned to serve him. Qin Han stepped forward to shield Zikong, his face turning cold as he warned Yu Qingtian to show some respect to Lord Pinggan. This only made Yu Qingtian laugh harder. He mockingly asked if Qin Han had been brainwashed, declaring that he would personally expose this fraud. He challenged Zikong, but not to a duel of strength. That would be far too easy. Yu Qingtian pointed the tip of his spear, leveling it at Zikong while speaking slowly. He proposed a competition to see who could complete the next mission first, specifically the gold rank one. The mission was to assassinate the traitorous Qian Huan Wuchang. They would race to see who could return with the traitor's head first. If Yu Qingtian won, Zikong would have to crawl back to wherever he came from, and Qin Han would serve him instead. If Zikong won, well, Yu Qingtian simply laughed dismissively, certain that such a thing was impossible. This declaration caused a stir among the watching assassins. It was quite clearly a trap designed specifically for Zikong. Qian Huan Wuchang was a former gold rank assassin, a master of disguise and stealth. He was incredibly cunning. Several groups had already been sent to kill him, only to be eliminated themselves. Yu Qingtian's spear style, being wide and powerful, was the perfect counter for that type of elusive enemy. As for Zikong, he was just a man pretending to borrow the power of heaven and earth. What use would that be in a manhunt? Everyone assumed he was doomed, and deep down, Zikong was inwardly groaning. He wondered why people were always trying to compete with him when all he really wanted was to live a quiet, lazy life as a complete nobody. Yu Qingtian mocked him, asking if he was too much of a coward to even try. Before Zikong could speak, Qin Han suddenly smiled, a cold, pitying sort of smile. She glanced back at Zikong and saw his usual expression of detached indifference, which she took for supreme confidence. Feeling reassured, she turned back to Yu Qingtian as if she were looking at a dead man. She accepted the challenge on Zikong's behalf, but insisted on changing the stakes. Her voice was as cold as ice as she declared that if her master won, Yu Qingtian would have to sever his own arm, leave the Nether Pavilion, and never set foot in the capital again. The crowd gasped at her words. To demand a master lose an arm and be exiled was a brutal wager indeed. Even Yu Qingtian was stunned. He hadn't expected the usually frosty Qin Han to be so fiercely protective of this supposed weakling. This only fueled his jealousy further. He agreed to the terms, eager to see how she would protect Zikong once he lost. Without another word, he spun his spear with a flourish, turned on his heel, and led his men away. Following him, his men vanished like a gust of wind through the stronghold gates. He intended to hunt down Qian Huan Wuchang at top speed and return to humiliate both Zikong and Qin Han. Silence returned to the courtyard, though the surrounding assassins watched Zikong with a mix of sympathy, malice, and intense curiosity. They wanted to see how this legendary god of killers would handle a direct, head-to-head test of strength. Qin Han turned to him, ready to ask what the next step of the plan was. "Master, what should we eat?" Zikong muttered, looking utterly exhausted. To be honest, he felt like his brain cells had finally given up the ghost. First, he'd been scared half to death by the Sword Saint's mission, and now a hot-headed youth was challenging him. In his mind, eating was the only priority. He needed to fill his stomach before doing anything else. Qin Han, however, saw this as a sign of supreme mastery. Even in the face of such a challenge, her master hadn't even blinked. His only thought was of food, a level of calm and composure that very few in the world could ever hope to achieve. "I will prepare it immediately," she said. In her eyes, this wasn't a lack of focus. It was a statement that Yu Qingtian wasn't even worth the effort. At the dinner table, Zikong transformed his frustration into an appetite, devouring 3 bowls of rice and 5 plates of food. Qin Han watched him quietly, occasionally refilling his bowl. She told herself that while her master appeared to be merely eating, he was actually replenishing the mental energy he had spent calculating how to defeat the Sword Saint. Yes, she was certain that was the case. Zikong finally finished and let out a satisfied burp, feeling like a human being again. "Bring me the intelligence on Qian Huan Wuchang," he said. He wiped his mouth, knowing that regardless of his desires, he had to deal with the mission. After all, his very life was still tied to that absolute luck system. As long as the target was within a certain power range, there was a chance to trigger a lucky accident. All he had to do now was find a way to locate the unfortunate traitor. Qin Han quickly returned with the scroll. We see the details of the target. His real name was unknown, 35 years old, and formerly a gold rank assassin of the Nether Pavilion. He had defected after embezzling mission rewards. He was a master of disguise, capable of mimicking anyone's voice and posture perfectly. Known as the Thousand-Faced Ghost, his cultivation wasn't high, only mid-tier second class, but he was an expert in poisons and traps. His last known location was the rocky slope west of the city. Zikong frowned at the name. He had heard of that place before. Located outside the capital, this abandoned lumber market was a maze of jagged rocks and deep pits, truly a perfect place to hide. We learned that Yu Qingtian had already led his men there. Though arrogant, his strength was undeniable, especially with his soul-chasing spear. If he found Qian Huan Wuchang, the traitor likely wouldn't last 10 rounds. Deep down, Zikong's heart sank. He wondered how he could possibly compete with that speed. His own 2 legs were no match for a horse. By the time he strolled over to the rocky slope, the trail would be cold. "No rush," he said, putting down the scroll. He picked up his teacup and took a slow sip. He had to keep up the act, as panicking wouldn't help him now anyway. Seeing this calm display, Qin Han felt even more reassured. She was certain her master had a hidden plan they couldn't grasp. To her, it seemed he didn't even care about racing Yu Qingtian. Perhaps he didn't even intend to go to the rocky slope. A sudden thought flashed through Qin Han's mind. Master, she asked, are we going to the rocky slope now? Zikong knew he had to go, or the system wouldn't trigger, but he couldn't look desperate. That would ruin his image. So he slowly set down his tea and gazed out the window. Let him scout the way first, he said casually. Those few words, spoken so lightly, sent another shock through Qin Han. Let him scout the way, what incredible confidence. With a trembling voice, she asked what he meant. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind, he replied, using a phrase he'd picked up from a drama. Qin Han gasped, a chill running from her feet to the top of her head. Looking at his profile, she felt she finally understood. Her master had calculated everything from the very beginning. He had deliberately provoked Yu Qingtian into accepting the challenge, sending him rushing off to hunt their target in a frenzy. To claim the prize, Yu Qingtian would surely use all his strength to force the thousand-faced ghost out of hiding. After a fierce battle, both sides would be exhausted. Then, her master would simply step in at the final moment. It was a brilliant move to finish the mission easily, while using the traitor to eliminate Yu Qingtian as a rival. In her eyes, this was a display of godlike scheming. To be honest, she found his foresight absolutely terrifying. The adoration in her eyes was beyond words. She was convinced her master had foreseen everything, while we see Zikong glancing back at her. Feeling utterly bewildered, he wondered what exactly he was supposed to have foreseen, as he simply didn't want to move and preferred to procrastinate. But looking at Qin Han's sparkling eyes, he knew any explanation would be useless, so he simply gave a deep, meaningful nod. A single word, MHM, carried more weight than 1,000 sentences. Qin Han clenched her fists in excitement, thrilled to be part of such an exquisite and brilliant plan. To witness her master manipulate hearts and play two great experts against each other like chess pieces was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. When do we leave? She asked, barely suppressing her fervor. When the sun sets. Zikong replied casually. He was thinking that traveling at night would make them smaller targets and keep them safe, but to Qin Han, this was yet another layer of genius. Sunset, the hour of twilight when yin and yang transition, is the moment when killing intent is at its peak. She was certain his choice of timing had a profound reason, and so, we see one of them actually idling away the time while the other was busy imagining a grand psychological war in her head. Only at dusk did the two finally board a carriage and head toward the rocky slope. Meanwhile, at the rocky slope, Yu Qingtian and his men had already turned the entire quarry upside down in their search. Qianhuan Wuchang, you rat, where are you hiding? Yu Qingtian roared, smashing a boulder to dust with a single strike of his spear. He cursed under his breath, having searched all afternoon without finding so much as a hair of his target. Boss, it's getting dark. One of his subordinates warned, noting that the pits and traps made the area dangerous at night. What is there to fear? Yu Qingtian snorted. He vowed that even if he had to tear the rocky slope apart, he would drag the traitor out. He simply refused to lose to that useless Zikong. However, from an inconspicuous corner behind a jagged rock, a pair of venomous eyes watched his every move. Qianhuan Wuchang was indeed there, watching Yu Qingtian's frustration with a cruel, mocking smile. If you want to find me, then come down and keep me company, he thought, quietly pulling several black nails from his robe. These were his specially crafted heart-piercing nails, coated in a lethal poison. The terrain of the rocky slope was incredibly complex, with massive stones and spiritual energy intersecting like a natural maze where Yu Qingtian and his men were currently wandering. After searching for several hours without finding even a shadow of Qianhuan Wuchang, his already explosive temper began to fray even further. Everyone stay sharp, Yu Qingtian roared, his voice echoing through the vast, empty quarry. He couldn't bear the thought of losing to a useless man like Zikong, nor that Qin Han would side with such a person against him. This humiliation and rage left him desperate for an outlet, and Qianhuan Wuchang was the perfect target. Boss, look over there, a sharp-eyed subordinate suddenly shouted, pointing toward a massive, abandoned mine pit nearby. Yu Qingtian's spirits rose instantly as he led his men on a charge toward it. Sure enough, at the edge of the pit, several faint footprints led deep into the pitch-black darkness. Truly a rat. Yu Qingtian sneered with disdain, only capable of hiding in the gutters. Wait here while I go down and drag him out. With his spear in hand, he prepared to leap into the depths. Boss, be careful, it might be a trap, his subordinate warned. What tricks could a second-rate coward who only knows how to hide possibly have? Yu Qingtian replied, dismissing the concern entirely. He possessed absolute confidence in his grandmaster-level strength. To him, any schemes or plots were merely a joke in the face of overwhelming power. However, he had no idea that 100 meters above his head, behind a massive boulder, Qianhuan Wuchang was lurking like a venomous snake, his eyes flickering with cold, killing intent. Qianhuan Wuchang looked down at Yu Qingtian, a cruel smile curling on his lips. You fool. At that moment, on a 30-meter high cliff, we see the truth. He wasn't in the pit at all. Those footprints were merely bait. His real killing move was waiting above. He had calculated that an arrogant man like Yu Qingtian would jump down without hesitation. And at the exact moment Yu Qingtian was suspended in midair, unable to change course, he would strike from above. In his hand, he gripped 3 poison-coated heart-piercing nails. These were his trump cards, capable of piercing a master's protective energy within 3 meters. He held his breath, waiting for the perfect moment, and then Yu Qingtian moved. With a powerful kick, he launched himself like a great bird, leaping straight toward the darkness of the pit. Now, in this moment, killing intent flares in Qian Huan Wuchang's eyes as he flicks his wrist, launching 3 heart-piercing nails like black streaks. They whistle through the air, flying in a triangular formation toward the airborne Yu Qingtian. The timing and the angle, to be honest, are absolutely perfect. Suspended in midair, Yu Qingtian has no leverage to dodge this inevitable strike. Qian Huan Wuchang can already envision the miserable sight of his target, poisoned and plummeting to his death. However, at this very critical moment, we see Zikong's carriage finally arriving at the outskirts of the rocky slope. Young master, Qin Han's voice calls out from outside. We have arrived. Zikong yawns, pulling back the curtain to peer out. This place, it seems, is rather eerie. Looking at the bizarrely shaped rocks, he feels a bit of a chill and reaches into his robe to pull out a water skin, hoping for a quick drink to calm his nerves. But just then, the carriage hits a stone, jolting violently. His hand slips, and the water skin falls to the floor with a heavy thud. The wooden stopper pops open, and the water spills out, soaking the area around his feet. With a sigh at his own bad luck, he bends down to retrieve the bottle. As he leans over, his head knocks against the wooden side of the carriage with a loud thud. In his sudden pain, he instinctively jerks his head upward, only to hear another thud as he slams into the roof's crossbeam. This, naturally, leaves him seeing stars and feeling completely dazed. He feels like a wobbling toy, tossed about and entirely out of balance. In his frantic flailing, his foot kicks out blindly across the floor, striking a piece of firewood tucked away in the corner of the carriage. The wood flies out, tracing a bizarre arc through the air for nearly 100 meters, flying straight and true toward the massive boulder where Qian Huan Wuchang is hiding. At this moment, the assassin's entire focus is fixed on the vulnerable Yu Qingtian. He doesn't notice the flying log approaching from behind. It strikes him squarely on the back of the head. His body goes limp, tumbling out from behind the rock, while the 3 nails he just fired suffer a fatal loss of accuracy due to his sudden loss of balance. Originally aimed at Yu Qingtian's vital organs, the 3 poisoned nails graze his clothes and whistle past, missing their mark entirely. In that split second, Yu Qingtian, feeling the sharp wind above his head, looks up just in time to see the figure of Qian Huan Wuchang tumbling from the massive rock. Realizing exactly what has happened, Yu Qingtian lets out a fierce roar and plants his foot firmly against the mine wall, propelling himself several meters higher. His spear transforms into a black dragon, lunging forward. With lethal precision, it pierces Qian Huan Wuchang's chest instantly. The assassin dies on the spot without even a groan. His body is pinned to the rock wall by the spear as Yu Qingtian lands steadily on the ground, staring at the lifeless eyes of his fallen foe. His brow furrows deeply. He had felt the cold breath of death just moments ago. If that fool hadn't lost his footing and caused his weapons to miss, Yu Qingtian knows he would likely be a corpse right now. He shakes his head, refusing to believe in mere luck. He assumes the assassin simply failed at the most critical moment. A failure is a failure, after all. He pulls out his spear, takes the head as a trophy, and prepares to show that man named Chun who the true powerhouse is. Meanwhile, back in the carriage, we find Zikong clutching his head in absolute agony. With 2 large bumps forming, he winces, wondering if he should have checked the calendar before leaving home today. Qin Han looks at his disheveled state and then at the distant corpse, a flicker of deep shock and realization crossing her eyes. She is certain the young master calculated this perfectly. Zikong, however, only knows that his head is throbbing painfully. He looks up, ready to vent his frustration, but meets Qin Han's eyes, which are shining with an unsettling intensity. There isn't a hint of mockery in her gaze, only a fanatical, almost holy devotion. He immediately swallows his anger. He realizes that trying to reason with her is a lost cause. Her mind simply doesn't work like a normal person's. If he tells her he just clumsily hit his head twice and accidentally kicked a piece of wood, she will undoubtedly invent an even stranger explanation. Perhaps she'd think hitting the beam was a way to stimulate his vital energy, or that his random kick was actually a strike infused with the hidden power of the heavens and earth. Zikong decides it's simply too exhausting to explain. He gives up the struggle, clutching his head in weary resignation. He lets out a weak groan, leans his head against the carriage wall, and closes his eyes to play dead. To Qian Han, however, that simple groan sounds like a clap of divine thunder, confirming that everything is proceeding exactly according to the young master's plan. Her mind begins to race at high speed, attempting to reconstruct the steps of this miraculous and complex strategy. She reasons that Yu Qingtian, being arrogant, would naturally choose a frontal assault, causing enough chaos to flush out the assassin. Knowing Qian Huan Wuchang is cunning and wouldn't die quietly, he was bound to set a lethal trap for the spearman. The young master calculated this perfectly, which is why he felt no need to even step out of the carriage. Instead, at the most critical moment, he used a method far beyond the understanding of ordinary mortals to intervene. By seemingly accidentally kicking a piece of wood, he struck from the most impossible angle at the most perfect time. To hit the back of the assassin's head like that, well, that would require a truly terrifying level of mental calculation. He must have predicted the assassin's exact position and mental state. The blow didn't kill him, but it broke his focus. This caused the deadly weapons to miss, turning Yu Qingtian into a borrowed blade to finish the job without even knowing it. From start to finish, the young master simply sat in his carriage, bumped his head twice, and gave a single kick. Yet, he played a top-tier assassin and a cunning traitor like puppets. This isn't just a scheme anymore, it's something higher. It is as if he reached out and plucked the strings of fate itself, making reality follow his pre-written script. The more Qianhan thinks, the more frightened she becomes, and the more Zikong's slender silhouette seems to grow like a god's. She looks at his face, which is currently twisted in pain, and begins a new round of imaginative leaps. Deep down, she is certain he has exhausted his mental energy. Such a heaven-defying deduction must surely come with a price. She tells herself his current suffering is the karmic backlash of changing destiny, yet he endures it all in silence. At this thought, Qianhan feels a pang of grief in her heart, her eyes now overflowing with a strange, protective pity. Filled with pity and affection, she quietly pulls a small porcelain bottle from her robe and pours out a fragrant medicinal pill. Moving with gentle care, she brings it to his lips, explaining it is a spirit-condensing pill to soothe the pain of mental exhaustion. Zikong, currently lost in a daze of pain, feels something soft pressed against his mouth and instinctively opens up to take it. The pill melts instantly, sending a refreshing wave of coolness through his mind that actually begins to dull the throbbing ache. He thinks to himself that the medicine is surprisingly effective, though he has no idea just how rare this gift truly is. To be honest, these pills are secret treasures of the Nether Pavilion, so precious that even gold-rank assassins only receive 3 a year. Qianhan never uses them on herself, yet she gave one to him without a second thought as the carriage returns to the stronghold. When we arrive, we find that Yu Qingtian has already returned, standing in the center of the courtyard with a blood-stained cloth bag. His face is a mask of unbridled arrogance and triumph as a crowd of assassins gathers around him to offer their congratulations. They praise his incredible skill, marveling at how quickly he dealt with the infamous Qian Huan Wuchang. They claim no one can withstand his soul-chasing spear, and that the man named Chun should finally give up any hope of competing. Yu Qingtian basks in the flattery, feeling a sense of absolute satisfaction. After all, this was exactly the effect he wanted to achieve. He wants everyone to know he is the strongest of the younger generation, while Chun is merely a lucky clown in his eyes. Just then, the carriage comes to a halt at the entrance, and every gaze in the courtyard shifts toward the arriving vehicle. Yu Qingtian's smile turns cruel as he strides forward, clutching the severed head and demanding that Chun show his face. Supported by Qianhan, Zikong slowly climbs down from the carriage, still clutching his head and feeling quite dizzy. To Yu Qingtian, this display of physical weakness looks like nothing more than the visible manifestation of a guilty conscience. He mocks Zikong for being too ashamed to face people, reminding him that according to their bet, he must now leave the pavilion. Yu Qingtian then turns his possessive gaze toward Qianhan, declaring that from this day forward, she belongs to him. Qianhan doesn't even spare him a glance, focusing entirely on supporting Zikong as if afraid he might fall at any moment. Qianhan finally speaks up, her voice cutting through the air even colder than the wind in the courtyard, asking Yu Qingtian who told him they had lost. Yu Qingtian reacts as if he's just heard a massive joke, gesturing to the severed head and asking if they truly intend to deny the obvious. He asks if she thinks the pavilion elders are blind, but she calmly retorts that while he may have struck the blow, the credit belongs to the young master. Yu Qingtian is absolutely furious now, dismissing her words as nonsense while his temper flares in front of the gathered crowd. He demands to know how the credit could be Zikong's when the man never even showed his face, mocking him for merely playing tricks in the shadows. Qianhan simply points toward the remains of the target, telling him to look closely at the body for any wounds other than his spear strike. Yu Qingtian frowns, not understanding what she's getting at, but he stoops down nonetheless to begin a closer inspection of the corpse. His subordinates crowd around as well, initially noting that the body looks clean, until they notice something unusual near the back of the head. A sharp-eyed subordinate suddenly shouts for the others to look at the base of the skull, where the skin is torn and the bone looks mangled. Yu Qingtian's pupils shrink as he realizes this is definitely not a spear wound. The skull underneath is completely shattered. An experienced old assassin steps forward, noting that it looks as though the man was struck with incredible force by a heavy, blunt object. After pressing against the bone and examining the trauma, the old man's expression turns grave as he declares that the fatal wound is actually right here. Yu Qingtian stammers in disbelief, insisting it's impossible because he was the one who personally ran the man through with his spear. The veteran explains that while the spear strike was lethal, the target's skull had already been pulverized by this blunt impact before the spear ever landed. He notes that even without the spear, the man wouldn't have survived more than a few minutes. In other words, the target was already a walking corpse. The old assassin takes a deep breath and looks towards Zikong as if he's a monster, stating that the target was effectively dead before Yu Qingtian even moved. The entire courtyard goes silent as everyone stands frozen in shock, while Yu Qingtian feels as though he's been struck by lightning, his mind buzzing. He struggles to process how this could be, just as Qianhan reveals a heart-piercing nail she found, which belonged to the assassin. She explains the nail was coated in a deadly poison, and if she's not mistaken, the target was preparing to use it for a sneak attack on Yu Qingtian. But at the very moment he tried to strike, a heavy blow to the back of his head caused him to lose focus and fail, saving Yu Qingtian's life. The veteran explains that this is why the 3 poison nails missed their mark. Otherwise, well, he doesn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understands his meaning. Otherwise, it would be Yu Qingtian's corpse lying there right now. Naturally, Yu Qingtian's face turns a ghostly, bloodless white. As he recalls that terrifying moment, his back is instantly drenched in a cold sweat. He realizes he had been standing at death's door. Someone had saved him, and so, as if by instinct, every gaze in the courtyard shifts once again toward the young master. We see Pingon holding his head, looking quite frail, yet a terrifying thought begins to take root in everyone's mind. Could it have been that piece of firewood? When they first arrived at the scene, they found a very ordinary piece of wood next to the body, the kind typically used for a carriage. The sound of collective gasps ripples through the courtyard as the pieces of the puzzle begin to fall into place. The truth is simple. Shen Pingon, while sitting in a jolting carriage over 100 meters away, had tossed a common stick of wood. This piece of wood perfectly anticipated the timing of the sneak attack, striking first and shattering the assassin's skull in a single blow. He hadn't just saved Yu Qingtian's life, he had completed the mission in passing. To be honest, Yu Qingtian was merely an afterthought. He had been nothing more than a tool used to deliver the final, redundant blow. As this realization sinks in, the way the crowd looks at Pingon changes completely. It isn't just respect anymore, it's fear, a deep, soul-shaking dread. Yu Qingtian, however, mutters that it's impossible. He stumbles backward, his spirit seemingly broken, shaking his head in a desperate attempt to deny the reality before him. He tells himself it must be a coincidence, a stroke of pure luck, because no human could possibly achieve such a feat. Qianhan's voice cuts through his denial like a blade, calling him a fool for daring to label such precision as mere luck. She walks up to Yu Qingtian, looking down at him with eyes full of nothing but pity for his narrow-mindedness. She asks if he still thinks the young master was actually competing with him. He was wrong. From the start, he was just a pawn on a chessboard. Now, she demands he fulfill his bet and crawl. Yu Qingtian's knees give way, and he collapses heavily onto the ground. His pride and self-confidence are shattered into dust in this single moment. He finally understands the gap between himself and Pingon. It isn't just a matter of strength, but of entire dimensions. While he was feeling smug on the first level, Shen Pingon was already on the 5th. I have lost, Yu Qingtian mutters with a bitter, hollow laugh, before raising his right hand and channeling his inner energy with a sickening crack. His entire right arm suddenly hangs limp and useless. He has just destroyed the very limb he took the most pride in, his spear-wielding arm. The agonizing pain turns his face a ghostly white, yet he bites his tongue and refuses to make a sound. He slowly forces himself to stand. He takes one last, long look at the man who hadn't bothered to glance at him even once, then begins to drag his ruined arm away. Stumbling and unsteady, he walks out through the gates of the Nether Pavilion. From this day on, the world of martial arts has lost a genius spearman. As for Yu Qingtian, he is gone, but within the Nether Pavilion, the legend of the god of slaughter, Shen Pingon, only grows more mythical. And that, as it turns out, was only the beginning of his terrifying reputation. We see the story continue to unfold here on the Yo-Yo television series exclusive. The journey of our protagonist remains as unpredictable as ever. Every step he takes leaves a lasting mark on those around him. Presented with English subtitles for your viewing pleasure. We return to the aftermath of the confrontation. The atmosphere remains heavy with the weight of what has just transpired. Brought to you by the dedicated team at YK. The legend of the young master continues to grow. None can say for certain where his path will lead next. Subtitles provided by YK for our international audience. We watch as the shadows of the past begin to fade. New challenges are already appearing on the horizon. Stay tuned as we follow the next chapter of this remarkable tale. Chinese subtitles provided by YK. 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 Chinese subtitles by YK.